Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Dutit. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. There is a lot to get to this hour, so let's begin. Visitors are now pouring into St. Peter's Basilica to pay their respects to Pope Francis as he lies in state. We're going to take you live to Rome. Plus, Elon Musk is planning to spend less time at Doge and more time at Tesla as the company's profits plummet. What his decision means for the department going forward. And the nominations are out for the 2025 American Music Awards. We'll tell you who topped this year's lists. This is CBS News 24/7. Let us begin at the Vatican, where thousands of mourners are lining up to say their final farewells to Pope Francis at St. Peter's Basilica. The body of the late pontiff will be lying in state until Friday for a public viewing before the funeral on Saturday. Now, early this morning, as many as 20,000 pilgrims gathered in St. Peter's Square for the procession. Latin chants and church bells filled the square for this part of the mourning process. CBS News special correspondent Nora O'Donnell is joining us live from Rome to talk about this. So, Nora, it must be an incredible sight to see all of these mourners, people who the pontiff has figured so much in their life, coming out to pay their final respects.
It is. It's absolutely extraordinary. A historic event, a global event right here in Rome, and we could witness it right over our shoulder in St. Peter's Square. As you mentioned, tens of thousands of people today from all over the world have come to pay their final respects. I was down there talking to many of them. There was one woman from Oklahoma City who came, was very excited to get inside and pray for the Pope. She talked about him as a faithful servant. Another family that I met from Dallas, Fort Worth, they are not Catholic, but they want to be here just because of the historic nature of what's happening. I met a family from Mexico, and the mother said to me that she wanted to be here because Pope Francis changed her life and has changed the world. So really an extraordinary set of events. You saw the procession this morning, Vlad. I mean, the College of Cardinals leading as they took the coffin with Pope Francis from Casa Santa Marta, which is the Vatican guest house where Pope Francis lived, and brought it into St. Peter's Basilica. And I'm sure you noticed, even though that was a really incredible procession, some of the differences already that are meant to reflect Pope Francis's humility. You know, he actually changed how the funeral would go about. This is, a tradition that has gone back through the 13th century, how popes are buried. And Pope Francis wrote in his autobiography, I don't want all of that. And so there are some real changes. And the first is what you see now. You notice how he is just on a very small wooden it's not even a platform. It's just a very small step. But in the past, popes have been on a huge catafalque in front of the entire group of people that come by to pay their respects. So that's just the beginning of how things are different. And then there'll be many more differences in the funeral that we will see on Saturday, Vlad.
Nora, I know as an altar boy for nearly a decade, I know that you had an opportunity yesterday to actually, you were invited to go into the area where the Pope's body was lying in repose. What was that just like for you, not just as a journalist, but more importantly as a Catholic?
You know, Vlad, it was something we were not expecting. It was a complete surprise. We got wind in the middle of the day that might be a possibility. There essentially was a private viewing for some nuns and some priests and people who work in the Vatican. And then we got word from a priest that we had worked closely with on the interview with Pope Francis that we conducted last year. So late last night, we were able to get inside the Vatican and wait in line. And then, once we got inside, I mean, it was so quiet. It was so solemn. We stood just feet away from Pope Francis. People reached out to touch his coffin. We heard one little girl kind of cry, and you could hear people, praying very, very quietly. But it was a moment of reflection. It was a moment to think about his legacy and what he has meant to people. And that's one of the things I think that I noticed, too, and we'll be talking about this in the days ahead. I think, he tried to change the Catholic Church to be more inclusive. He was not able to change a lot of doctrine, but the tone that Pope Francis used and the way he tried to be more inclusive, whether it was on issues of all the people who feel marginalized around the world, to make them feel more included. I think that is going to be part of his legacy, that humility modesty, all reflecting St. Francis of Assisi, that, of course, revolutionary priest who's focused so much on poverty, and why Pope Francis chose his name to become the first Pope ever that chose the name Francis. And I think that's what's really interesting about this. And then, Vlad, I'm also just struck by what we're going to see on Saturday. Someone had said to me, we haven't seen a papal funeral in 20 years since Pope John Paul II. There are expected to be foreign delegations from more than 150 countries. I mean, President Trump and his wife, President Zelensky, leaders from Great Britain, including Prince William, will be here. I mean, just about every major world leader is going to be here. I mean, kings and queens are already saying they will be here, too. And that will all happen behind me in St. Peter's Square, where there will be, I'm told, a 2.5-hour-long funeral mass. And, of course, we will cover it right here on CBS News. Vlad.
Yeah. Nora, I guess it's an excellent point that you make about all those world leaders and even perhaps members of the aristocracy that will come to pay their final respects to the pontiff. But I'm reminded, as you just indicated, of his humility. And while you're right, he wasn't able to change the doctrine of the church as much, but symbolism matters. I recall back in 2024, around this time, leading up to Easter, how the Pope exclusively washed the feet of women. That had never been done, or had been many, many years since that had ever been done. And I'm told that even in the way that he is going to be buried, it will not even signify in his tomb that he was a Pope. Am I right about that?
You are right, and I'm glad you brought that up, because he is going to be, most popes are buried at the Vatican. There are some exceptions, but Pope Francis wants to be buried at the Basilica of St. Mary Major, and that's a few miles from here. And the reason he loves that church is because it is the largest and oldest Marian church, meaning, of course, praising the Blessed Virgin Mother Mary. And he goes and prays there more than 100 times. He went there before and after every trip. And so, as you mentioned, he had requested that he be buried in the earth, as he says, and he will only have the name Franciscus outside of his tomb. Most of these popes, and if you've ever visited here, you notice, of course, all the Roman numerals and the name, and it says, of course, Pope or Papa before their names. And his will just say Franciscus, noting that sort of humility. And I think part of that, too, Vlad, is he wanted to always put the focus on others, which is what I learned about, growing up as a Catholic, to focus on the other. And that's sort of a humility. And that's why when we interviewed him a year ago, and when I asked him if he likes being called the People's Pope, that's when he smiled really broadly, because I think that is part of his legacy, being known that. And then, as you pointed out, I'm glad you noticed that, there have been popes in the past that have washed the feet of the poor. Pope Francis did that. He washed the feet of prisoners, too, and of females, and that was new. And, of course, that is a reflection. The symbolism of that, I think, was a nod to the calls for the church to modernize. Nuns are the backbone of the Catholic Church. They're the ones who take care of the poor. They're the ones who teach in all the schools. They're the ones in the hospitals. And so, many people have asked Pope Francis to try and modernize. I asked him, will they ever be priests or deacons? He said no, but he has appointed some women to positions of power. And I think he has tried to put some of the focus back on what women do for the church. Vlad.
Nora O'Donnell reporting from Rome. It took you 10 years, Nora, to get that interview with the Pope, and it is so fitting that you are there to witness this final chapter of Pope Francis's life and legacy. Thank you, Nora, for spending some time with us. Appreciate it.
Always great to talk to you. Thank you, Vlad.
All right, I want to bring in Mary and Benjamin Moritz, who received a marriage blessing from the Pope 2 years ago, and they join me now to talk about their experience. So you could hear my interview, guys, with Nora, just about who Pope Francis was and what he represented to people, not just Catholics, the billion Catholics around the world, but people, as Nora indicated, who are not Catholic, who are there to also pay their final respects. So tell us how this happened to be, how your experience came to be.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. We heard from a family member that there's this thing called the newlywed blessing, where in your first couple months of marriage, you can go to Rome and get your marriage blessed by the Pope. So we thought, well, we got to do that. And so we went to Rome. We got the tickets to go meet the Pope and get our marriage blessed. And through all this research of this blessing, I heard of a tradition of switching hats or zacchettos with the Pope. And so I said, okay, well, if we're going to meet the Pope, we might as well try to switch hats with him. So I found his papal tailor, and we went to the little shop and bought one of his zacchettos. So when he came up to bless our marriage, I studied my Italian a little bit and asked him in Italian to switch hats with us. But I don't speak Italian, so I don't think it came out that beautifully. And the Pope started to chuckle, and then I started to laugh, and then I saw him reach up and take his hat off and grab our hat and switch with us. And it was so amazing. So now we can say, you know, we made the Pope laugh. So it was just great to have that like joyful encounter with him.
That's beautiful. Let me ask both of you, starting with you, Ben, how you will remember Pope Francis, but how you think that the world should look upon his legacy and his papacy.
Yeah, I think that he is going to be remembered as a Pope of joy, just as Mary alluded to, right? Is there any picture without him smiling? He's just an incredibly joyful person. And I think Catholics really should grab onto that. And they do grab onto that, is living the joy of the gospel, as we say. And yeah, living the life so that it's transformative to others, that other people see the joy of Christ in each other. That's ultimately what we'll take away most from it, I'm sure.
What about you, Mary?
Yeah, I thought Ben said it great. Also, his humility of going out and like serving the marginalized. So we're Catholic school teachers, and that's what we kind of want to model that too. Go out and serve our students, just to bring Christ's love to everyone we meet.
I love it. Thank you guys for spending some time with us to share that incredible memory. And the picture that we just saw there with the zucchetto in a glass in a container, is that at the Vatican or is that there at your church?
It's actually, we keep it in our house, but I took it out for the special occasion today. We always keep it in that little case that we got, but taking it out today. Inside of it, there's actually a piece of his hair. So if he becomes a saint someday, we get really excited because this would be a first-class relic. So as a Catholic, we kind of nerd out about it being a possible first-class relic someday.
That is
so yeah,
very
we keep
cool.
it in our house, and it's a good reminder of his pontiff and our call to serve.
I love it. That's really beautiful. Mary and Benjamin, thank you so much for spending some time with us. This is great. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right, we will bring you the funeral of Pope Francis on Saturday in a CBS News special report. Coverage begins at 4 a.m. Eastern right here on CBS News 24/7 and on Paramount+. Okay, we are hours away from a new deadline in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. A federal judge said the Trump administration has willfully and intentionally ignored court orders to provide updates on what steps they've taken, if any, to facilitate his return from El Salvador. Judge added, quote, "That ends now." I want to bring in CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman to talk more about this. Hey, Katrina.
Good morning.
So what is it with this judge asking or waiting for the 6 p.m. deadline? What is that about?
Yeah, so this order from Judge Zenas was scathing, Vlad. She is clearly fed up with what she views as the government obfuscating her orders. What she's asking for is for the government to fulfill its discovery obligations, to turn over this information that she's been asking for about who has been involved in both ordering Mr. Abrego Garcia to El Salvador and then any effort to bring him back. The government has also been asserting privilege, and basically all forms of privilege, from attorney-client to state secrets. And she says that you have to support that with legal and factual bases. So she wants those turned over as well by 6 p.m. today. The government did file overnight, Vlad, asking for more time. They want a stay, and it was sealed, so we don't know exactly what it said. But as of now, as far as I know, that 6 p.m. deadline stands. So
we've actually heard from the Trump administration defending their actions this morning. I want to play a little bit of what Tom Homan had to say. Listen.
An MS-13 gang member, public safety threat, wife beater, designated terrorist from the United States. He's home. He's a citizen of El Salvador, a native El Salvador, who had due process, despite what you're hearing, been ordered removed by 2 separate immigration judges. The best that could happen for him, if he actually gave back to the United States, he would be detained and removed again, because he has an order of deportation. And what people don't talk about, the withholding order they keep saying was the mistake or oversight. was issued years ago under different circumstances. The gang he was afraid would attack him no longer exists. The country of El Salvador is a much safer.
All right. So let's break down that statement. Is he a member of MS-13?
This has not been proven. They claimed when he was arrested that he was wearing, a sweatshirt that maybe indicated that there was an alleged informant, but this has never actually been a finding in court, Vlad. And, there are a number of issues with that statement, particularly that the administration, when he was first taken to El Salvador, admitted that this was an administrative error, that he had this withholding of removal. Here in the United States, the district court judge, Judge Zenas, has also found that he was sent there without the proper due process. So there is a way to handle this. They could have bring him back to the United States, give him the due process, and if these things are in fact found in court, he can be deported. But also, very importantly, he was not supposed to be sent back to El Salvador with that withholding of removal. They could have sent him to another country, but they sent him there.
So interesting. All right, so we'll see what happens at 6 p.m. Katrina, thank you very much, as always. Appreciate it. President Trump seems to be changing his attitude towards Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. The president now says he has, quote, no intentions of firing him. This comes after the president called the Fed chair a major loser and posted on social media saying Powell's termination cannot come fast enough. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand is live at the White House and joins me now to talk about this. Natalie, so the whiplash, of course, between Trump and Powell and Musk and the tariffs and China is up one day, China is down one day. It's having real effect on the stock market and on the ability of business leaders to sort of plan ahead for the future. So a couple of things. One, with regards to these new statements or these new thoughts from the president regarding the Fed chair, Jerome Powell. And then yesterday also suggesting the administration that they will figure out a way to make a deal with China, which seems to have eased the market sentiment just a little bit. But what's going on? Why is Trump softening his stance on this?
Yeah. Hi, Vlad. Good to be with you. Well, we saw that the stock market did not like it when President Trump stepped up his criticism of the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, and suggested, that he could potentially be looking to get rid of him. But today we are seeing stocks sharply up at the start of trading today, given this sharp shift by the president, as you noted, in his tone with regard to Powell, saying yesterday afternoon that he has no intention of firing the Fed chair, which, as we've been talking about, this is an independent agency and position, and Powell himself has said, the law specifies that he cannot be fired without cause. So we saw this remarkable softening by the president yesterday with respect to Powell, and also, as you noted, a softening when talking about the trade war with China, saying, that they want to negotiate, they want to be nice, and that the current 145% tariff on Chinese goods will come down, the president said, substantially, though noted not to zero. Vlad.
Fascinating. Let's turn to some other news out of the White House. Elon Musk says he's going to be taking a step back at the Department of Government Efficiency. Tesla stock is getting crushed. The revenues are down. Is that what is driving his decision?
Yeah, this news came on a call with Tesla investors, and he said that really his work with Doge, now that it's kind of up and running, will be winding down. He suggested that he might still allocate 1 to 2 days a week on government matters, as long as the president wants him to. But he signaled that his time allocation on White House matters will be reduced significantly as he tries to refocus on Tesla, which he did acknowledge has received some blowback. But it's also important, Vlad, to keep in mind his designation was as a special government employee. And the rules around that specify that an individual with that classification cannot work more than 130 days in a calendar year. So that's important to keep in mind here as well.
Very important reporting there. Natalie Brand for us at the White House. Natalie, thank you. Okay, at this hour, the convicted shooter in the Highland Park July 4th parade faces the start of his sentencing trial. Details from the courtroom ahead. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Officials say crews in southern New Jersey have made enough progress against a wildfire to lift mandatory evacuation orders, but the flames are still burning and threatening the area in Ocean County, which remains under a state of emergency. So far, at least 8,500 acres have burned. CBS News Philadelphia reporter Ross DiMattei has more.
The smoke has been a major storyline all morning long here in Ocean County, New Jersey. It kind of comes in waves, especially as the wind shifts depending on the direction, but it has never really left. In fact, you can still see it in the tree line here along Bay Avenue. And Jones Road, where the fire originally broke out, is not far from where we're standing. In fact, there are pieces of ash still raining down in this area, although evacuation orders for the folks living in this area have since been lifted. I want to show you some video courtesy of Chopper 3 from earlier this morning as the Jones Road wildfire continues to burn here in Ocean County. Heavy flames and thick smoke could be seen from miles away, especially yesterday. And at one point, those flames came really close to the Garden State Parkway. In fact, officials had to shut down the parkway between exits 62 and 80 for hours overnight. But we learned earlier this morning that it has since reopened. And more good news. Mandatory evacuation orders for 3,000 residents were lifted earlier this morning, allowing all of those folks to return home after a night at a nearby shelter. We spoke with a lot of them as they were forced to flee their homes with nothing but their most prized possessions and, in many cases, their pets. But again, they are going home now this morning after those evacuation orders have been listed. Everyone is now waiting on fire officials to provide another update on their efforts to contain this fire. Again, at last check, only 10% contained. It's already burned through 8,500 acres. We're told that they're going to hold a news conference at 11 o'clock this morning. We will carry that for you live on CBSPhiladelphia.com and across all of our streaming platforms as we look to get an update on fire containment and what may have caused this fire to break out in the first place. In Barnegat Township, Ocean County, New Jersey, Ross DiMattei, CBS News Philadelphia.
A sentencing hearing has just started for the man who killed 7 people and wounded dozens more at a 4th of July parade in Highland Park, Illinois in 2022. CBS News Chicago reporter Darius Johnson has more.
Good morning. This hearing could take days, and that's because before sentence is handed down, victims' families and survivors will finally have a chance to take the stand. We're expecting to hear from more than 50 of them. All of them will recount exactly what happened that day and how it has impacted them. It was July 4th, 2022, a shooting that claimed 7 lives, leaving 48 others injured. Robert Cremo's guilty plea came just last month before his trial was set to begin. The jury was already seated, and this was a shock after a prolonged court process. At the time, Lake County State's Attorney Eric Reinhart emphasized the significance of today's hearing.
It comes from the bravery of every victim and every surviving family member who was prepared to come forward in this trial, and they will come forward in this sentencing hearing.
It's unclear if Cremo will be in the courtroom during these statements. Legal experts say while he has the right to be present, he may choose not to attend. But if he refuses, the judge could order the sheriff to bring him into court. At that point, he would be present listening to those victim impact statements. Now, Cremo faces a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole, but it is up to the judge to decide whether to sentence him consecutively or concurrently.
All right, Darius Johnson reporting for us. Thank you, Darius. Fallout from a shakeout inside one of the nation's most prominent Justice Department offices. We're going to have details next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following for you this morning. A jury in Arizona has convicted so-called doomsday mom Lori Vallow Daybell of conspiring to murder her estranged husband back in 2019. She now faces a second life sentence. Vallow Daybell has already been convicted in Idaho for killing her children and conspiring to kill her ex-boyfriend's wife. Day 2 of Karen Reed's second murder trial is underway in Massachusetts right now. Her first trial last year ended in a hung jury. Reed is accused of killing her police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe. She pleaded not guilty. The jury heard opening statements from both sides yesterday. The prosecution presented new cell phone evidence. Reed's lawyers argued the investigation into O'Keefe's death was biased and corrupt. After court yesterday, Reed told reporters she felt the start of this trial, quote, went well. You can watch gavel-to-gavel coverage on CBS News Boston. And this surveillance video shows a moment a woman and 2 children narrowly avoided an explosion on a sidewalk in Poughkeepsie, New York. You can see them walking down the sidewalk right up at the spot where the manhole suddenly burst, cracking the ground around them and sending them running for safety. Look at that. Wow, this was actually one of 2 manholes that exploded in the area. No one was injured, thankfully, but the blast is still under investigation. No one knows as to now why that exploded. Wow. Good news is that they're safe. All right, St. Peter's Basilica is filled with mourners saying their final farewells to Pope Francis right now. The late pontiff's body will be lying in state until Friday before the funeral on Saturday. I want to bring in CBS News contributor John Allen to talk a little bit more about this. John, thanks for joining us. So just for our audience to understand how the Pope's papacy over the course of the decade reshaped the views of people around the world, not just Catholics, but just the people, ordinary folks who might have been inspired by some of the acts of humility that he put on display.
Yeah, Vlad, Pope Francis was very much the people's pope, this man of simplicity and humility. I think that radiated and sort of electrified the world. But I think deeper than that, Vlad, consider the stories that you and I and all of our colleagues have been covering the last 12 years, whether it's wars in Gaza and Ukraine, South Sudan and Yemen, global debates over climate change and poverty and the death penalty and immigration. On every one of those issues, Pope Francis was a commanding and I would say even singular voice for the voiceless. He was the tribune of the underclass, the voice for those people who are getting squelched by all of those crises. Now, it's not like just because he spoke, he magically resolved all of those problems. There still is war, there still is poverty, there still is the death penalty, and there still are closed borders to migrants and refugees. But nevertheless, he took the world sort of by the scruff of the neck and made it pay attention. That is a role that no one else on the global stage for the last 12 years played in quite the same way. And so I think in that sense, that's one of the things that cardinals, when they file into the Sistine Chapel in short order to elect a successor to Francis, they want, in part, someone who can have the same capacity to make it absolutely impossible for the wider world to ignore what the Catholic Church has to say.
John, as you know, Pope Francis appointed 108 of the 135 current cardinals, many from countries with first-time cardinals like Haiti and Myanmar, reflecting a more diverse and globalized church. You know, the question I have is oftentimes the countries where Catholicism is expanding are often the countries that are the most conservative or the most traditional. I've seen that during my time as a foreign correspondent in Africa, where I profiled the family of Cardinal Peter Turkson. He was in line back in 2013 to be Pope before Francis was ultimately selected. I've seen that in Asia. I've seen that in the Caribbean. So do you expect that if a pope does come from another region outside of Europe, that we may see a more traditional approach to the papacy and to Catholicism? Or will someone who comes from another country outside of Europe continue Francis's legacy of perhaps a non-traditional approach to thinking about doctrine?
Well, Vlad, let me start by giving you an old piece of Roman wisdom, okay? It goes like this. You always follow a fat pope with a thin one. And what the Italians mean by that is just because Francis appointed almost all of the cardinals who will elect his successor, that doesn't mean they're going to run off to a photocopy machine and give us a clone. I mean, often they think, well, that approach has had a good long time to work itself out. Now it's time to try something different. And you were absolutely right to put your finger on the developing world as critically important to this conversation. Quick piece of math. There are 1.3 billion Catholics in the world today. Close to 3/4 of those 1.3 billion, almost 800 million, live outside the West. They live in the places you mentioned, Africa, Latin America, Asia. the Pacific Islands and points beyond. And you are right on some of the hot-button doctrinal issues that form so much of Catholic debate, whether we're talking about the ordination of women to the priesthood or LGBTQ plus issues or the Church's teaching on abortion and birth control. Often, those Catholics in the developing world tend to be more conservative. Now, on the other hand, precisely because many of the cardinals appointed by Francis themselves tend to be a little bit more progressive, what that shapes up is a dynamic in this coming conclave in which neither one of those camps may have the capacity, they may not have the numbers to get to that magic 2/3 vote threshold you need to elect a pope, in which case, Vlad, they're going to have to go shopping for a compromise candidate.
Really interesting. And John, quickly before we let you go, the chances of seeing an American pope probably not going to happen, right? And I wonder if that has a lot to do with geopolitics. In other words, you've got President Trump, who's sort of like a bull in a china shop on the world stage these days, anointing someone as the head of the Catholic Church with all the power that entails. It might be seen by some of those cardinals that you mentioned that are looking for a compromise candidate as a bridge too far. Am I right in assessing that?
Well, I think you're probably about 80% right. You know, it used to be said it was absolutely impossible to have an American pope because you can't have a superpower pope. But, you know, we live in a somewhat new world in the early 21st century in which America is no longer the world's lone superpower. I frankly think that the cardinals coming into this conclave are less interested in where a candidate comes from than what he stands for. And if they were to find the right American, Vlad, I don't think that is any more an absolute impediment to being elected pope.
Fascinating. Really interesting, John. Thank you very much for your perspective, as always, my friend. All right, a reminder, we'll bring you the funeral of Pope Francis on Saturday in a CBS News special report, which begins at 4 a.m. Eastern right here on CBS News 24/7 and Paramount Plus. Ryan Black will be working that day. Okay, the former head of the Securities and Exchange Commission is now the interim head of one of the largest offices in the Department of Justice. Jay Clayton is now the interim U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. I want to bring in CBS News Department of Justice correspondent Scott McFarland to give us an update on that. So a little background there on Jay Clayton and how his interim appointment could give President Trump an opening to make it a permanent position. Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, Vlad, he's not a household name, and this position may seem obscure to people. But to be clear, the federal prosecutor who leads the Southern District of New York is leading arguably the most powerful and one of the largest federal prosecutors' offices in America. And it is now being led by a man who was once the Securities and Exchange Commissioner in the first Trump administration. Jay Clayton is a close Trump ally inside an office that is, to be by design, independent from politics and independent from the White House. Nevertheless, he's taking charge of the Southern District of New York. He's also the president's nominee to take over this position if confirmed by the U.S. Senate. But this isn't happening in a vacuum. He is taking over a position that has been in the headlines over the past few months because that's the office that's been prosecuting Eric Adams, the mayor of New York. And that's the office that saw a series of high-profile resignations because the people in the office believed the Trump administration was putting its thumb on the scale in the handling of Eric Adams' case to get the mayor to align with them on immigration issues. So there's no shortage of drama, but now there is somebody in the post aligned with Trump.
Really interesting. Let me ask you, Scott, about former Congressman George Santos, who is expected to be sentenced on Friday in his fraud and corruption case. There's been a flurry of court filings in the case this week. What are you learning?
There is a household name, George Santos, the former congressman from Long Island, who was expelled by the Congress in a remarkably rare thing. He had pleaded guilty in a fraud case, accused of bilking people, accused of using his office and his power unlawfully. Here's the thing, Vlad. He's facing a mandatory minimum when he's sentenced Friday in Central Islip, New York. 2 years minimum based on the plea he took in his fraud case. But the Department of Justice is going to argue for 7+ years in prison for George Santos. And a part of the argument they're making, according to documents reviewed by CBS News, is that Santos, after tearfully pleading guilty in court in August, has been posting angry, menacing posts about the Department of Justice in recent days, seemingly running counter to his acknowledgement of guilt and his statement of remorse. Criticizing the case, criticizing the feds. That is not the thing you're often advised to do on the eve of a sentencing. It happens midday Friday. We will find out how much prison time is awaiting George Santos.
You're right, Scott. George Santos is a household name. I wonder, though, what about Kitara Ravashi, or whatever the pseudonym was? For our viewers who may not know what I'm referencing, they should just go on Cameo if Kitara still has an account there. Scott, thank you very much.
No
Scott,
problem, Vlad. You should just go on Cameo is the phrase of the day, Vlad.
That's right. Just check out Cameo. Scott, good to see you, my friend. Appreciate it. All right, coming up, how residents of the late Pontiff's home country, Argentina, are remembering his legacy. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. We're following some comments from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who is speaking at the Institute of International Finance this morning. The secretary criticized the IMF and the World Bank while, of course, defending the Trump administration's trade policy. No surprise there. Let's listen.
I invite our allies to work with us as we rebalance the international financial system, refocus the IMF and World Bank on their founding charters. America First means we are doubling down on our engagement with the international economic system, including at the IMF and the World Bank. A more sustainable economic system will be one that better serves the interests of the United States and all the other participants in the system. We look forward to working with all of you in this endeavor. Thank you.
And of course, the speech comes on a day we are seeing some big gains on Wall Street. The Dow's up more than 1,000 points this hour. We're going to keep an eye on the markets, of course, throughout the course of the day. As mourners pay their final respects to Pope Francis, Ione Wells, with our partners at the BBC, traveled to the late Pontiff's home country of Argentina to see how he is being remembered and honored by residents there.
Etched into this city's streets, and the memories of its people, as their archbishop, as an advocate for the poor, as one of them. This message is a sentiment many here share. He reminded people that in the church there is room for everyone, everyone, everyone. This cathedral in Buenos Aires has opened its doors for mourners, here to write a final message to him, or simply to offer their prayers. Many of them have praised his work helping the poor, from the country's soup kitchens to its prisons.
He's well known for his action towards the most humble people from different places. In everyday life, he was very close to ordinary people. It is a source of pride because he's the first pope not only from Argentina, but from Latin America. I hope his legacy continues.
The church was not the only community he dedicated a lifetime to. Another was San Lorenzo, his local football club. His fans say his commitment lasted until the end. His membership card number was his age, 88, and the local time that he died in Argentina, 2:35.
Imagine that the first archbishop from Argentina is also a member of your club. For us, it was an important honor, and for him it was a pleasure, something he wanted to do in his life. His father was a basketball player for San Lorenzo, so he inherited his fandom for the club.
His views, his outspokenness, his criticism of some politicians made him a divisive figure. But one thing that unites everyone in this country is their memory of him as a local who grew up in this house, in the city, close to the people that he served. His funeral will be a global event, but here the grief is distinctly Argentine. Ione Wells, BBC News in Buenos Aires.
Switching gears now, the nominees are out for this year's American Music Awards. Did your favorite song or artist make the cut? We're going to break it all down next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. The nominees for major categories for the awards show were revealed this morning. Kendrick Lamar leads all artists with 10 nominations. Post Malone, Chappell Roan, and Billie Eilish also received multiple nominations. I want to bring in Jem Aswad. He's the executive editor of music at Variety. Jem, great to see you as always, my friend. Song of the Year, that category is jam-packed. What do you think it takes to bring home the honor this time?
It's a little hard to say, you know, and it almost feels because they were the biggest songs of last year. You almost have to like sort of click your mind back a little bit to remember some of these songs. But Not Like Us, to me, was hands down Song of the Year. Speaking personally, not as a voter or anything like that, because it dominated popular culture in ways that songs rarely do. I mean, other ones, you know, the rest of the songs are absolutely great. Beautiful Things, massive pop song. Birds of a Feather, beautiful pop song. Plenty, you know, two others as well. But I would really, in terms of what you look for in a Song of the Year, give it to Not Like Us.
Yeah, I think Not Like Us, I agree with you, Jem. Not Like Us it's almost like the song of the decade, although I do love Sabrina Carpenter and Espresso and almost everything that she's done.
I would agree completely. She's a really interesting pop star in that there are so many lyrics on her album in particular where you're just like, wait, did she just say that? And, you know, there's a level of risqueness to her lyrics, not so much in Espresso, but in a lot of the other songs where like it's a great big wink, and that makes it more exciting and it makes her compelling, you know, more compelling for a lot of reasons because she's a different kind of pop star. She's not afraid to be upfront about sexuality and lots of other things, but it's always with a wink and a sense of humor, so it's not taken too seriously.
So speaking of Sabrina Carpenter, let's talk about Artist of the Year. Again, all the categories that we were privy to early this morning are really, really difficult ones because I sort of love everybody in them. Who do you think might eke out the win?
Well, Kendrick, in many ways, you know, certainly could be that. I don't want to use the word deserves. But in terms of an artist who absolutely came out of nowhere and just galvanized the music world, it's Chappell Roan. And that was a very unusual case. I saw her perform at the end of February 2023. And she was playing most of the sets she's been playing ever since then. There were a couple of other songs in there, and I don't even think that Good Luck Babe had been written yet. But, you know, it was completely packed. It was at New York's Webster Hall. And people were just singing along and crying and holding their chests and everything like that. And I've been doing this long enough to know that when you see something like that, it's like, okay, something's going on here. And what surprised me even more, because like I wrote this article basically saying a star is born or a superstar is born, it took a long time. You know, her album with a lot of those songs that she was playing that night didn't come out until October, I think, and it didn't really take off until last spring. I remember seeing her at Governor's Ball, the New York City festival that she headlined, and it was just mass hysteria. And it was the sort of thing, it reminded me a lot of when I first saw Billie Eilish in June of 2019. Her album had just come out, and it was that same feeling. You could tell it was going to blow up, and it certainly happened.
I 100% subscribe to everything you said. I'm a huge Chappell Roan fan. Really, really remarkable individual and artist. Jem Aswad, always great to have you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And you can watch the American Music Awards hosted by Jennifer Lopez, J-Lo, on May 26th. Coverage begins at 8 p.m. Eastern on CBS and on Paramount+. For a wrap-up of the day, let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Tammy Sousa with the first look at the national forecast. Hey, Tammy.
Well, hello, Vlad. You know what? We're going to focus on what's been going on with that wildfire that is in the Northeast. This is near Toms River in New Jersey. We have the perfect conditions. We have low humidity in the 20s to the 30s. We have gusty winds, 20 to 30 miles an hour. And we still have drought conditions. So we have very dry brush out there, which makes it very, very easy for the fire to get going. This is the radar image. This is the particulate matter that goes up in the air, and the radar is able to capture it. So you can see this is now blowing to the south. And the thing is that this is going to swing around, and before you know it, this is actually going to be blowing to the north and the east. So we have a northeast wind now blowing it south along the Jersey Shore, but look what happens by tonight and even tomorrow. It blows it north, and that smoke is going to be over New York City, maybe even as far north as Boston. You may have some pretty sunsets, but just when you look in the sky, know that it is the smoke from the wildfires. Back over to you, Vlad.
All right, Tammy, thank you very much. Appreciate it. That does it for me, folks. Stay right where you are, though. After the break, Lugo Dewey is live from San Francisco with all the breaking news from coast to coast. This is CBS News 24/7.